as one someone talked about in the last session. It is a strategy for labor that defies current trends of class collaboration with the employer. It is a strategy that starts from the basis that there are two major contending classes in society, workers and capitalists, that are engaged in a constant struggle. Including undocumented workers, there are roughly 330 million people in the U.S. On one side, we have 540 billionaires that represent an elite ruling capitalist class. They exploit and oppress across the globe with all wheels turning in the interests of serving capital. On the other side, there are 125 million full-time employed workers, 27 million part-time or underemployed workers, and roughly 30 million unemployed workers. Furthermore, there are 40 million retired and nearly 10 million disabled workers, plus 29% of mothers who stay at home unpaid, raising the next generation of workers, which totals about 23 million. Including roughly 12 million undocumented immigrant workers and 77 million children under 17, we have a sizable force of some 320 million people, and that's probably low, who make up the working class. Despite having an overwhelming majority, the working class controls nothing in the arena of industry and politics. While the trade unions represent a vehicle for the working class to struggle for its own interests, in the US, the class as a whole is considerably weakened due to the fact that only 11%, or 14.5 million, are organized in trade unions. Furthermore, there is no mass party of the workers to provide leadership to the class. This is a real crisis, and it's going to be taken up by Dan shortly. Still, the 11% who are organized, who have won health care and pay increases, and protections on the job represent a considerable roadblock to the billionaire boss's ability to extract more profits from workers in oppressed communities. For example, take UPS and FedEx, both multi-billion-dollar corporations. UPS is organized by the Teamsters, and FedEx is not. FedEx, while maintaining a high rate of exploitation and administering harsher discipline, have to pay their workers comparably to UPS workers, who as Teamsters collectively negotiated a contract with UPS management. On the flip side, non-union workers at FedEx weaken the ability of Teamsters at UPS to negotiate better contracts. Imagine what could be gained if workers at FedEx joined the Teamsters and industry-wide the bosses were forced to negotiate with a completely organized labor force. We're talking more than 500,000 workers who could in an instant seriously threaten the viability of the supply chain and devastate the profits of the bosses. However, organization alone does not guarantee benefits for the working class. A political perspective is important. If the union does not function independently of the corporate elite and independently of the political parties that represent the capitalist class, tracking the Democrats and Republicans again, the ability of the union to fight for workers is seriously obstructed. When I go to 2006, I learned a thing or two about the betrayal of the Democratic Party. Incidentally, it is also the year I really committed to revolutionary socialist politics. Thanks to meeting some of the comrades in Socialist Action, I began going to immigrant rights meetings in Danbury, Connecticut, where a serious battle was unfolding and attacks and raids on the immigrant workers by police and ICE agents were a daily threat. 2006 also happened to be the year when millions of undocumented immigrant workers with documents, and their families and allies stepped out of the shadows and took to the streets to protest wretched and racist federal legislation put forward by Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner. And that legislation would have criminalized anyone who even associated with undocumented immigrants. The top union leadership at the time, a privileged bunch and class collaborationists to the core, once likened the leadership of a mass movement to the crew on a sailboat. What matters is the wind in the sails, they said. Sorry, let me read that again for more. What matters is the wind in the sails, they said, not the fight over who steers. And where did they steer the millions who took to the streets demanding justice? They steered them directly into the maelstrom of the Democratic Party in collaboration with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, whose promise of immigration reform amounted to legislation that would deepen the exploitation of undocumented workers and grant no real amnesty or path to citizenship. So then let's move to Wisconsin. I learned another important political lesson in 2011, when hundreds of thousands of workers, students, and their allies marched and occupied the state capitol in Madison, Wisconsin, to protest the governor's threat to dismantle collective bargaining, to allow government bosses to dictate wages, cut benefits, and privatize services as they saw fit. The working class responded with teacher sickouts, student walkouts, and all types of creative protests that simultaneously connected the struggle in Wisconsin with the revolution going on in Egypt. Working people around the country were deeply moved by this experience. Labor unions, community groups, and activist organizations sent delegations to support the occupation, along with donations of money and food. A small but not insignificant experience I had in Connecticut occurred when I was trying to send a really large banner that said, "Stop government attacks on unions, Muslims, immigrants, and communities of colors. Trillions for jobs and education, not war." I was sending it to Wisconsin for an anti-war delegation that was joining the rally at the state capitol. The guy behind the counter at the UPS store put two and two together and he asked, is that for the union rally in Wisconsin? I nodded my head and he quietly gave me a big discount and said, "I hope you win." After years of people struggling through the economic crisis and taking hit after hit, this upsurge sparked the imagination of working people to fight back. The night that Governor Walker and the legislature rammed through their union-busting bill, they had to sneak out the back door because the front was occupied with workers and students chanting "General Strike." A general strike could have shut the whole city down and brought the establishment to their knees. Except for one or two blue-collar AFL county labor councils, not one official called a strike. A call to action never really came. Instead, union officials, along with their Democratic buddies, who, by the way, fled town early on so as not to have to deal with the situation, cooked up a scheme out of the playbook that has been passed down from Democrat to Democrat for generations. At the height of the working class rebellion, at the height of this working class rebellion that has not been seen since the 1970s, the Democrats and labor leaders told everyone to go home. They said the workers should rely on the Democrats, who had a plan to recall the legislators and the governor. The protesters, however, wouldn't go so easily and had to be cleaned up using the oppressive force of the police. The recall, and there had been some confusion early on because some of the police had joined the demonstrations and there was confusion about what side the police were on, but they learned at the end. The recall election proposed by the Democrats shot a hole in the foot of the labor movement in Wisconsin that's still recovering from today. Now, to today, in the standing round. I'm in the process of learning a third very important lesson. Right now is global CO2 concentrations just past 400 parts per million. A major component to fighting climate change has been opposition to frack gas and the building of pipeline infrastructure to move natural gas around the country. Fracking and the resulting pipeline build-out have met with fierce opposition and have been incredibly inspired by the current fight led by the Standing Rock Sioux Nation. Now is a time when organized labor should thrust its power into the fight for radical transformation of society to switch to 100% renewable energy. We know from a leaked letter that Richard Trumka, president of the AFL-CIO, under pressure from the leadership of the building trades unions and the Democrats, issued a statement endorsing the Dakota Access Pipeline against the protesters, essentially. But this should not come as a surprise, as an article in Common Dreams recently pointed out that the president of the North American Building Trades Unions, Sean McGarvey, has, quote, forged controversial labor management partnerships with large corporations and celebrated stronger ties with powerful industry lobby groups like the American Petroleum Institute and the American Chemistry Council. We also know from WikiLeaks that Hillary Clinton fully supports the building of the Dakota Access Pipeline. And in a meeting with the building trades, she said, us climate activists should just get a life. That won't be so easy on a dead planet. The question is, will we in labor allow this type of class collaboration to destroy the planet, or will we stand up and fight back as climate unionists to save the earth? Can we win rank and file trade unionists to the perspective of independent working class political action? I think we will. Today, there is a coalition of unions inside the AFL-CIO that include transit workers, nurses, communication workers, and my union of postal workers that have opposed the top leadership and issued statements in solidarity with the Standing Rock Sioux. Labor for Palestine has issued a petition with nearly 15,000 signatures demanding Trumka take back his remarks. You should find it online and sign it. And if you are able, on October 29th and 30th, attend the union camp at Standing Rock. This is all a step in the right direction. It gives a layer of class-conscious workers an opening to advance the perspective of independent political action. I believe to win this fight and save our planet, it's going to take transforming the current unions into a fighting labor movement organized on the basis of renewed rank-and-file democracy. To be successful means growing organized labor to include much larger portions of the 321 million members of the working class. We need to organize the masses of fast food, home care, warehouse, retail, farm labor, and undocumented workers, graduate student workers, and so on. Class struggle left-wing perspective will swell the ranks with new life and take on not just climate change, but all the problems of capitalist society, and stand with Black Lives Matter, immigrant rights, free education, and universal health care. Students are an important part of this process too. Labor solidarity from students is indispensable. That's another important lesson I learned from my time as a member of the CCSU Youth Socialist Action. Nothing energizes a picket line like a group of students marching in to join. Of course, one day, you'll be in the workforce if you're already not. I know most of us here at CCSU working and going to school. And maybe you'll find yourself like me in the union. That's good, because the class struggle is not cooling off anytime soon. You'll find yourself walled in by difficult questions. The lessons you learn by getting involved now will make all the difference when later you're confronted with these questions.